The unluckiest team in the NFL. Now this isn't unlucky as in one drop pass or one missed kick away from a win. I mean unlucky as in teams being plagued by injuries throughout a season and not being able to catch a break. I knew I wanted to do this at some point because of how the Chargers used more than 20 different offensive line combinations last season, and as we can now see, that was probably the reason Melvin Gordon and the rest of the Chargers offense struggled for most of last year. Behind a healthier line, Gordon can't stop scoring touchdowns, getting 6 in 4 games compared to 0 all of his rookie year. I've always thought the Chargers were a very talented team that just doesn't seem to get any luck with injuries, and I felt terrible for them and wanted to look at the numbers to see if they really are the unluckiest team in the NFL, or whether it just appears so. Of course, they also lost Allen last year too, which was a huge shame, and when he went on injured reserve again early this year, that's when I started doing the numbers for this. And I was actually going to look at something else this week, and then Verrett tore his ACL, and now we're here. So to start, I looked at the numbers of games missed by every team's starters throughout the 2015 season, and of course that doesn't consider the importance of individuals or certain positions, but I feel like the final order came pretty close to what you might expect, and it's only one part of this anyway. So, which teams in the NFL couldn't catch a break when it comes to injuries? The unluckiest team to that definition last year was the New England Patriots, with 84 games missed by starters. For reference, the league average by my numbers was around 53 games. Their offensive line was one of the worst hit, with no position missing less than 3 games and an average of 6.5 games missed per position. Right behind them by 1 game were the Ravens, who had players missing time at every single offensive position except for 2 linemen. On the other side of the scale, the luckiest team were the Jets, with less than half the average games missed. Then it was the Seahawks, and in 4th place, the Super Bowl champion Denver Broncos. You know, in many ways, the old adage, defense wins championships, doesn't tell the whole story. Defense doesn't win championships, neither does offense, health does. Having a vital player missing or not at full health can scupper your whole season. Now, of course, that's not strictly true. You still have to be a very good team, but a bit of bad luck and an unfortunate injury can make how good you usually are completely irrelevant. So I'm not saying the Broncos weren't a good team in the first place, but it's no coincidence that they also happened to be very lucky when it came to injuries and managed to win the Super Bowl. But this isn't about last year, this is about this year, so I combined last year's numbers with how many players teams have already had to put on injured reserve. So every single team in the NFL has players on injured reserve already, but some teams have absolutely no starters or even important role players listed, whilst others have a couple of number ones in there already. Let's talk raw numbers. 260 players are currently on IR across all NFL teams. The 2 lowest teams are the Falcons and the Eagles, with only 3 players each. The Chargers are in 1st place with 16 players on injured reserve already. Not only is that 30% of their original 53-man roster, it's twice as many as the league average. That alone should make them the unluckiest team in the NFL, and then you look at who the missing players are. There's Keenan Allen, the team's number 1 receiver and by far the best receiver, and then there's Danny Woodhead, who led the team in touchdowns last year and in receiving yards. Their starting middle linebacker Manti Te'o joins that list as well, and then most recently their number 1 and Pro Bowl cornerback Jason Verrett. 2 key players from each side of the field, and we're only 4 games in. The next highest team are the Chicago Bears, with 14 players on injured reserve, and there are a good number of important players in there too. The Bears had the 4th most games missed by starters last year, and the Chargers were 5th, and both are right back at the top again this season. That's bad luck. And both of these teams are notorious underachievers, and can you really blame them when they just can't keep their players on the field? But there's another way to look at this, and that is to look at the salary cap hit. So right now, like I said, there are 260 players on injured reserve, and they take up a combined $281.5 million of cap space. That's a lot of dead money. One way to see how important players on injured reserve are to their teams, without looking at individuals, is to look at the cap hit. It shouldn't be a surprise to know that the team with the highest 2016 cap hit in injured reserve are the Minnesota Vikings. $27.5 million sat on IR, spread across 9 players, and that unsurprisingly is also the highest average at $3 million per player, with the league average being $1 million. It's also around 18% of their total cap space. I don't think any team, even the Chargers, has been unluckier than the Vikings this season. Losing your starting quarterback and then the face of the franchise is insane. but they've been doing well regardless, largely down to an almost fully healthy defense. One team that doesn't show up too high here are the Dallas Cowboys because they haven't added Tony Romo to injured reserve. They of course were very unlucky last year, ranking 7th in total time missed, and both Romo and Bryant are injured again this year. If we were looking at all time missed, they'd probably be number 1, but a team isn't unlucky for having players missing time for suspensions. That's like buying a car with 200,000 miles on the clock and then blaming bad luck when the engine conks out. I think 3 teams are currently tied for the title of the unluckiest team in the NFL. The Vikings, who are undoubtedly the unluckiest this season, the Chargers, who were 5th in terms of total games lost last season, but maybe 1st in terms of impact of those losses, and this season are 1st in total players on injured reserve and 9th in average value, but probably again at least 2nd in impact. And then the Bears, who I think got written off too easily as just not a good team. John Fox is an extremely good head coach, but the Bears were 4th in games missed last year, a 2nd this year in total players on injured reserve, and 5th in average value of those players, and that doesn't even consider all the short-term injuries they've already suffered this season as well. So what I want to know is, who do you think is the unluckiest team in the NFL? And of course it doesn't have to be one of those 3, they are just the teams that stats right now suggest it is.